The autumn evening was settling in, casting long shadows across the bustling fitness center's parking lot. Special Agent Taylor had just finished her usual Wednesday workout routine, a mix of strength training and cardio that helped her stay sharp for her demanding role at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore simple black leggings and an oversized purple university hoodie, looking like any other person heading home after a gym session. 12 years into her FBI career, Taylor had built a reputation as one of the Bureau's most effective agents in combating human trafficking. Her most recent case had led to the dismantling of a cross-border trafficking network operating across 3 states, resulting in the rescue of 27 victims and the arrest of key syndicate members. But tonight, she wasn't Special Agent Taylor, she was just another woman leaving the gym, her badge and credentials tucked away in her well-worn gray gym bag alongside her water bottle and workout shoes. The parking lot was half full, with the usual mix of after-work gym-goers heading home and evening exercise enthusiasts arriving for their nighttime routines. The familiar scent of autumn leaves mixed with the crisp October air as Taylor walked toward her car, mentally planning tomorrow's case briefing. She'd been tracking a new trafficking operation that seemed to be using small beauty salons as fronts, and something about the financial patterns wasn't adding up. As she walked, she found herself thinking about her journey to the FBI. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Michigan, she'd always dreamed of making a difference in people's lives. Her mother, a high school teacher, and father, a small business owner, had instilled in her a deep sense of justice and community service. It was a devastating trafficking case in her hometown during her college years that had ultimately steered her toward a career in federal law enforcement. The sound of distant sirens momentarily pulled her from her thoughts, a common enough sound in the city that usually warranted little attention. What did catch her attention, however, was the reflection of headlights in the gym's large windows, moving unusually slowly through the parking lot. Years of training and field experience had honed her situational awareness to a fine edge. She continued walking at the same pace, but her senses heightened. The gym bag felt heavier now, though not because of her damp workout clothes or the water bottle inside. Her credentials were in there, along with her service weapon, standard protocol even during off-duty hours. But reaching for either would mean stopping, turning around, and potentially escalating a situation that might be nothing more than her professional paranoia. Through the reflection in the parked car's windows, she could see it was a police patrol vehicle, crawling along at walking speed. Her heart rate picked up slightly, not from fear, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with uncertain situations. She'd been here before, both as a civilian and as an agent, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Taylor thought about her most recent human trafficking case, where she'd spent weeks building trust with frightened victims, assuring them that law enforcement was there to protect them. She'd testified before congressional committees about the importance of community trust in law enforcement, about how essential it was for people to feel safe approaching police officers for help. She'd even conducted training sessions for local police departments about building better community relations. The memories of those training sessions flickered through her mind as she observed the patrol car's reflection getting closer. She remembered standing before rooms full of officers, sharing statistics and real-world examples of how unconscious bias affected policing. Some officers had been receptive, eager to learn and improve. Others had sat with crossed arms and skeptical expressions, convinced that their methods didn't need updating. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably a message from her partner about tomorrow's briefing. They'd been working together for 3 years now, building one of the highest success rates in their division. Their different backgrounds and perspectives had proven to be their greatest strength, allowing them to see cases from multiple angles and connect dots that others might miss. The gym bag swayed gently as she walked, its contents shifting with each step. Inside, beneath her workout clothes and shower supplies, lay her FBI credentials. The same credentials that had gotten her into high-security facilities, federal courthouses, and crime scenes across the country. The same credentials that had helped her coordinate with local law enforcement countless times during joint operations. She was now about 30 yards from her car, a modest sedan that blended in with the other vehicles in the lot. The patrol car's headlights were still following her, creating a long shadow that stretched out before her on the asphalt. The evening had grown quieter, with only the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the gym's outdoor air conditioning units breaking the silence. Through the windows of the gym, she could see people going about their workouts, running on treadmills, lifting weights, chatting with friends between sets. Normal people doing normal things, unaware of the tension building in the parking lot outside. Taylor thought about how quickly situations could change, how a routine evening could suddenly become something entirely different. Her training kicked in automatically, mental notes about her surroundings, escape routes, potential witnesses, security cameras. The gym had cameras covering the parking lot. She'd noticed them her first day there, an old habit from years of surveillance work. There were still a few other gym members walking to and from their cars, some giving curious glances at the slow-moving patrol car. As she neared her vehicle, Taylor's mind wasn't on the case files waiting for her at home or the early morning briefing she had to prepare for. Instead, she was thinking about the young trafficking victims she'd helped rescue last month, how they talked about their fear of authority figures, their hesitation to seek help from law enforcement. She thought about the promises she'd made them about changing the system from within, about making things better for everyone. The patrol car's engine rumbled closer, and Taylor could feel the situation about to shift. Her fingers brushed against her phone in her pocket, considering whether to stop recording. It was a sad reality that she'd thought about this scenario before, had even discussed it with other agents during coffee breaks and after-work gatherings. They'd shared their own similar experiences, swapped stories and advice, all while acknowledging the bitter irony of federal agents feeling apprehensive about encounters with local law enforcement. The autumn wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves in the nearby trees and carrying the faint scent of someone's takeout dinner from a nearby restaurant. Such a normal evening, Taylor thought, as she reached for her car keys. Such a normal moment in time, about to become something else entirely. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, another message, probably her partner following up about tomorrow's briefing. It would have to wait. Right now, she needed to focus on the immediate situation, on handling whatever came next with the professionalism and composure that had become second nature during her years with the Bureau. But beneath that professional exterior, she felt the familiar weight of frustration and determination, frustration at having to deal with this situation at all, and determination to handle it in a way that might lead to positive change. The patrol car's lights hadn't activated yet, but Taylor knew they would. She could feel it coming, like the pressure drop before a storm. As she approached her car, she thought about all the training sessions she'd conducted, all the speeches she'd given about improving police-community relations. In a few moments, she would find out if any of it had made a difference in her own community. The irony wasn't lost on her that tomorrow's briefing was about identifying patterns. Patterns in financial transactions, patterns in criminal behavior, patterns in society. As the patrol car's engine growled closer, she couldn't help but recognize another pattern unfolding, one that she'd hoped would have begun to fade by now. But sometimes, she reminded herself, the most important changes start with moments exactly like this one. The patrol car's presence felt like a shadow growing larger with each passing second. Taylor kept walking at her normal pace, though every instinct from her 12 years of FBI training told her something wasn't right. She'd seen this pattern before, not just as a law enforcement officer, but as someone who'd experienced it firsthand growing up in Michigan. Through the reflection in the parked car's windows, she watched the police vehicle creep along, moving at barely 5 miles per hour. The parking lot lights created a strange dance of shadows and reflections, making it difficult to see the officer inside clearly. Other gym members were still coming and going, some slowing down to watch the scene unfold, perhaps sensing the building tension in the air. Her gym bag felt heavier with each step, the strap digging into her shoulder. Inside, her FBI credentials and badge lay buried under her workout clothes, but reaching for them now didn't feel right. Years of experience had taught her that sudden movements in these situations often made things worse, not better. Besides, she shouldn't need them. This was her neighborhood, her gym, her community. A young couple walked past, giving her concerned glances before hurrying to their car. Taylor could hear them whispering to each other as they passed, their keys jingling nervously in their hands. She wanted to tell them it was okay, that they didn't need to worry, but she knew better. This moment wasn't about reassuring others, it was about staying focused and alert. The cool evening air carried the sounds of traffic from the main road, mixed with the muffled thump of workout music from inside the gym. Through the large windows, she could see people still exercising, their normal evening routines continuing while this surreal scene played out in the parking lot. A personal trainer was demonstrating proper form to a client, completely unaware of the tension building outside. Taylor thought about her morning briefing at the FBI office, where she discussed the importance of community policing with her team. They'd talked about building trust, about treating every citizen with respect regardless of circumstances. The irony of that conversation hit her now as she felt the patrol car's headlights illuminating her back. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, probably her partner checking in about tomorrow's case files. They'd been working together on a complex trafficking investigation, and any other time, she would have answered immediately. But right now, her focus needed to be entirely on her surroundings, on staying safe, on handling whatever came next professionally. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Taylor adjusted her hoodie, careful to keep her movements slow and visible. Her trainee had taught her to stay calm in high-pressure situations, but this was different. This wasn't about chasing down suspects or coordinating raids. This was about being viewed as suspicious for simply existing in a space. She could hear the patrol car's tires crushing fallen leaves behind her, the sound somehow louder than the engine's low rumble. Other cars were leaving the gym's parking lot, their headlights sweeping across the scene like spotlights. Some drivers slowed down as they passed, their faces illuminated briefly by the parking lot lights, showing mixed expressions of concern and curiosity. Taylor's car was still about 20 yards away, a distance that suddenly felt much longer than usual. She'd parked under one of the bright parking lot lights. An old habit from her early days in law enforcement. Good lighting meant better visibility, better security camera footage if needed, better chances of deterring any potential threats. Now that same light would make sure whatever happened next would be clearly visible to anyone watching. The gym's front doors opened and a group of people walked out, their laughter cutting through the tension in the air before quickly fading as they noticed the scene unfolding. They stopped at the entrance, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Taylor could feel their eyes on her, on the patrol car, on this moment that was quickly becoming something none of them had planned for in their evening. Her FBI training kicked in automatically, assessing escape routes, noting potential witnesses, identifying security cameras. The gym had 4 cameras covering the parking lot. She'd counted them her first day there, another habit from years of surveillance work. 2 were pointed directly at this area, which could be either a blessing or a curse, depending on how the next few minutes played out. A few drops of rain began to fall, creating dark spots on the pavement. The weather forecast had mentioned scattered showers, but Taylor hadn't expected them so soon. The drops hit her hoodie, creating tiny dark spots on the purple fabric. Such a normal detail to notice in such an abnormal moment. She thought about the training sessions she conducted for new FBI agents, teaching them about maintaining composure under pressure. Your reaction can escalate or de-escalate a situation, she always told them. Stay professional, stay calm, stay focused. Now she found herself repeating those words in her head, a mantra for what was coming. The patrol car's engine revved slightly, the sound echoing off the surrounding buildings. Taylor resisted the urge to turn around, to confront whatever was about to happen. Her years of experience told her to wait, to let the situation develop, to respond rather than react. But there was also a part of her, the part that had spent years building cases, training officers, and working to improve law enforcement, that felt a deep disappointment in what was unfolding. More gym members were gathering near the entrance now, some with phones in their hands. Taylor couldn't blame them. Documentation had become a natural response to these situations. She'd seen countless videos like this during training sessions, used them to teach about what to do and what not to do. Now she was about to become part of one. The sound of radio static crackled through the evening air. The officer was probably calling in her location, her description. Taylor wondered what words they were using, what suspicious behavior they'd invented to justify this slow-motion pursuit through a gym parking lot. She'd seen the paperwork from these stops before, reviewed them during investigations. Suspicious movement, furtive behavior, matched a description. Her car keys felt cold in her hand as she gripped them tighter. She was close enough now to see her car clearly, a sensible sedan chosen specifically because it didn't stand out. In her line of work, blending in was often an advantage. Tonight, it seemed, blending in wasn't an option. The patrol car's lights hadn't activated yet, but Taylor knew they would. It was just a matter of time, a question of when rather than if. The familiar adrenaline began to flow, but this time it wasn't from chasing down leads or preparing for a raid. This was different. This was personal in a way that her professional experiences had taught her to recognize but never quite prepared her for. She could see her reflection in her car's window now, distorted but clear enough to show her expression, calm, composed, ready. Years of training and experience had taught her how to wear this mask, how to keep her emotions in check even when everything inside was churning. But beneath that professional exterior, questions burned. How many others had faced this same situation? How many didn't have the training she had? How many didn't have the badge that lay in her gym bag? The rain was falling steadily now, creating a soft patter on the pavement that almost, but not quite, drowned out the sound of the patrol car's engine. Taylor was just steps away from her car, but she knew this evening was far from over. The real test was about to begin, and how she handled it would matter not just for her, but for everyone watching, everyone who might face similar situations in the future. Life as a federal agent had taught her that moments like these often became turning points, not just for the people involved, but for the larger story of how law enforcement and communities interact. As she heard the patrol car's gears shift, she prepared herself for what would come next, knowing that sometimes the most important changes start with the most uncomfortable moments. The burst of red and blue lights suddenly painted the parking lot in harsh colors, reflecting off the wet pavement and parked cars. Officer Reeves stepped out of his patrol car, his hand already resting near his weapon. The sound of his car door slamming echoed through the lot, causing several onlookers to flinch. "Stop right there. Let me see your hands," he shouted, his voice carrying more aggression than the situation warranted. Taylor carefully raised her hands, maintaining her composure despite the adrenaline now coursing through her body. Her gym bag hung heavily from her shoulder, its contents, including her FBI credentials, still hidden inside. "Good evening, officer," she said calmly, her voice steady and clear. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The rain continued to fall softly around them, creating a gentle backdrop to this tense encounter. Through the gym's windows, people had stopped their workouts to watch, some pressing phones against the glass to record. Officer Reeves moved closer, his boots splashing through small puddles. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," he barked, though Taylor knew this was the same generic excuse she'd heard countless times before, both as a law enforcement officer and as a civilian. "Show me some identification now." The growing crowd of witnesses had their phones out, recording everything. Taylor could hear their murmured conversations, their concerned whispers. Some were calling out that she had done nothing wrong, that they'd watched her walk straight from the gym to her car. But Reeves seemed to ignore them all, focused solely on what he decided was a threat. "Officer, I'd be happy to show you my ID, but I'd like to know what specific suspicious activity I'm being accused of," Taylor responded, maintaining her professional tone. Her FBI training kicked in automatically. Keep calm, de-escalate, document everything. She noted his badge number, his name tag, the time displayed on the gym's outdoor digital sign. Reeves moved closer, his hands still hovering near his weapon. "I don't have to explain myself to you," he snapped, his face twisted with unnecessary anger. "Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." The rain had begun to soak through Taylor's hoodie, but she barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on managing this situation safely. A woman's voice called out from the growing crowd. "This is wrong. She just finished her workout." We all saw her. Others joined in, their phones recording steady streams of video that would later become evidence. But their presence seemed to only agitate Reeves further, his face reddening with each passing second. Taylor thought about her years of experience, the countless training sessions she conducted on proper procedure and community relations. Everything about this stop was wrong. The approach, the aggression, the lack of probable cause. But she knew that pointing this out now would only escalate things further. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job," she said carefully, keeping her hands visible. "But I've done nothing wrong, and I'd appreciate if you'd lower your voice so we can discuss this professionally." The rain had picked up slightly, drumming against the parked cars around them. Reeves' response was immediate and physical. He grabbed Taylor's arm roughly, attempting to spin her around toward the car. "I said put your hands on the vehicle," he shouted, his voice echoing off the surrounding buildings. The crowd gasped, their phones capturing every moment of this unnecessary escalation. Taylor maintained her balance, her years of FBI training helping her stay steady despite the aggressive move. Her gym bag swung with the motion, its contents shifting. She could feel her credentials inside, just inches away, but reaching for them now might make things worse. "Officer, you're assaulting a federal agent," she said firmly, loud enough for the witnesses to hear. "I suggest you remove your hand and step back." But Reeves either didn't hear or chose to ignore her words, his grip tightening as he tried to force her against the car. The crowd had grown larger now, their voices rising in protest. Through the gym's windows, more people had pressed against the glass, watching the scene unfold. Some had run outside despite the rain, adding their phones to the dozen or more already recording. "This is abuse of power," someone shouted from the crowd. "We're all witnessing this." Another voice called out, "We've got your badge number, officer." The parking lot had become an arena, with every move, every word being documented from multiple angles. Taylor knew this moment would have consequences, not just for Reeves, but for the entire department. She'd seen similar incidents in her FBI work, had investigated departments for exactly this kind of behavior. But right now, her priority was preventing this situation from becoming even more dangerous. "Last warning, officer," she said, her voice carrying the authority of her federal position, even though he couldn't yet see her credentials. "You are currently assaulting a federal agent. Release me and step back." The rain continued to fall, creating a curtain of water that reflected the patrol car's flashing lights. Reeves responded by reaching for his handcuffs, his face a mask of unwarranted anger. "You're under arrest for resisting," he declared, though Taylor hadn't resisted at all. The crowd's protests grew louder, their phones capturing every moment of this abuse of power. As he pulled at her arm again, Taylor's gym bag finally slipped from her shoulder. It hit the wet pavement with a soft thud, its contents spilling out across the ground. Among the workout clothes and water bottle, something else clattered onto the asphalt, something that would change the entire dynamic of this encounter. Her FBI badge and credentials landed face up, the gold shield gleaming under the parking lot lights. The rain splashed against the leather case, but the federal seal was clearly visible to everyone watching. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the only sound the steady patter of rain and the humming of the patrol car's engine. Reeves' grip on Taylor's arm loosened as his eyes fixed on the badge. The color drained from his face as the reality of his actions began to sink in. The crowd had gone quiet, phones still recording as this pivotal moment unfolded. In the silence, the weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the rain-soaked air. Taylor stood perfectly still, her arms still held in Reeves' weakening grip, waiting to see how he would handle the realization that he'd just assaulted a federal agent in front of dozens of witnesses. The night had started as a simple gym workout, but it had become something much more significant, a moment that would force yet another conversation about power, accountability, and the need for change in law enforcement. The rain continued to fall, washing over the scene, but it couldn't wash away what had just happened. This moment, captured on countless phones and witnessed by dozens, would have repercussions that would echo far beyond this parking lot, far beyond this rainy evening, and far beyond Officer Reeves' career. Time seemed to stand still in that rain-soaked parking lot. Officer Reeves' grip on Taylor's arm had frozen, his eyes fixed on the FBI credentials gleaming on the wet pavement. The crowd of witnesses remained silent, their phones still recording as the situation took this dramatic turn. "Step back from the federal agent, officer," a voice called out from the crowd. It belonged to an older man who had stepped forward, his own law enforcement experience evident in his commanding tone. "You're already in enough trouble." The rain continued to fall steadily, creating a gentle soundtrack to this tense moment. Reeves finally released his grip on Taylor's arm, taking an unsteady step backward. His face had lost all its previous aggression, replaced by a dawning understanding of just how badly he'd mishandled the situation. The red and blue lights from his patrol car continued to flash, painting everyone in alternating colors. I was responding to a suspicious person call, he stammered, his voice barely audible over the rain. The excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears, especially with dozens of witnesses shaking their heads in disbelief. Several gym members had stepped forward to gather Taylor's scattered belongings, carefully avoiding her FBI credentials which remained visible on the ground. Taylor slowly bent down to retrieve her badge and ID, her movements deliberate and calm despite the anger she felt building inside. As she straightened up, she held the credentials out where everyone could see them clearly. "Officer Reeves," she said, her voice steady and professional, "I'm Special Agent Taylor with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Would you like to explain your actions tonight?" The crowd had grown larger, with more people emerging from the gym despite the rain. Some had opened umbrellas, determined to stay and witness what happened next. Others were already uploading their videos to social media, their fingers moving quickly across wet phone screens. "I didn't. There was a call." Reeves tried again, but his excuses fell apart under the weight of reality. The dashboard camera in his patrol car had recorded everything, as had the gym's security cameras and dozens of witness phones. There would be no explaining away his behavior, no report he could write that would justify his actions. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, the gym towel still draped around her neck. "I saw the whole thing," she announced, her voice clear and confident. He followed her from the moment she left the gym. There was no call. We'd all watched him target her for no reason. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered witnesses. Taylor pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen despite the raindrops. "This is Special Agent Taylor, badge number 7726, she spoke into the phone. "I need a supervisor from the local PD at the Planet Fitness on Oak Street. Officer Reeves, badge number 4591, is currently on scene." Her voice carried the weight of authority that came from years of federal service. The rain had begun to ease, but no one in the crowd moved to leave. They stood their ground, phones still recording, determined to see this through. Through the gym's windows, more faces pressed against the glass, watching the scene unfold. The personal trainers had stopped their sessions, the treadmills stood empty, as everyone focused on the drama in the parking lot. "You know what this means, don't you?" Taylor continued, addressing Reeves directly. "Every second of this encounter has been recorded. Your approach, your aggression, your physical assault of a federal agent, all of it captured from multiple angles." She gestured to the phones held by the witnesses, then pointed to the gym's security cameras. Reeves shifted uncomfortably, his hand now far from his weapon, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. In the distance, sirens could be heard approaching, likely the supervisor Taylor had requested. The officer's eyes darted between Taylor's FBI credentials and the growing crowd, seemingly searching for a way out of the situation he'd created. "I train police officers," Taylor said, her voice carrying to everyone in the parking lot. "I teach them about community relations, about proper procedure, about treating every citizen with respect. Would you like to know what I'm going to tell them about tonight?" The question hung in the rain-fresh air, heavy with implications. More police cars were pulling into the parking lot now, their lights adding to the surreal atmosphere. The first to step out was a police lieutenant, his face already set in a grim expression as he took in the scene. The crowd with their phones, the FBI agent standing tall despite her wet clothes, and his officer looking increasingly small in his rain-soaked uniform. "Lieutenant," Taylor called out, her voice professional but firm. "I'd like to file a formal complaint about Officer Reeves' conduct tonight. I'd also want every second of footage from his dashcam and body camera preserved." The lieutenant nodded, already understanding the severity of the situation he'd walked into. The crowd had begun sharing their videos with each other, making sure multiple copies existed of every angle. Some were already talking about what they'd witnessed, their voices a mix of anger and disbelief. "He didn't even give her a chance," one man said. "Just started grabbing her like she was a criminal." Taylor turned back to Reeves, who seemed to be trying to make himself as small as possible. "This is what happens when bias overrides training," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when you decide someone is suspicious based on how they look rather than what they're doing." The lieutenant had pulled Reeves aside, speaking to him in low, intense tones. More officers had arrived, beginning to take statements from witnesses who were eager to share what they'd seen. The gym manager had come out with umbrellas for those still recording, a small gesture of support for people determined to document everything. "I want every officer in this department to know what happened here tonight," Taylor continued, addressing both the lieutenant and the crowd. "Not just Officer Reeves' actions, but the consequences that come with them. This isn't just about me, it's about every person who's ever been profiled, every citizen who's been treated like a criminal for simply existing in a space." The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a glistening parking lot that reflected the emergency lights like a mirror. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if the rain had washed away more than just the day's heat. There was a sense among everyone present that they'd witnessed something significant, not just an incident, but a moment of change. Taylor looked at her watch, noting the time for her report. What should have been a simple evening at the gym had become something much more: a teaching moment, a catalyst for change, a reminder that accountability in law enforcement wasn't just a concept but a necessity. As she began giving her official statement to the lieutenant, she knew this night would have repercussions far beyond this rain-soaked parking lot. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded like a scene from a movie, but this was painfully real. The gym parking lot had transformed into an impromptu command center with police vehicles, witness interviews, and the constant glow of phone screens as people shared their recordings of the incident. The police lieutenant stood with his notebook open, raindrops occasionally falling from his cap as he took Taylor's official statement. His face grew increasingly serious with each detail she shared, occasionally glancing over at Officer Reeves, who sat in a patrol car looking deflated and scared. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," the lieutenant said, his pen hovering over the wet paper. "He followed you from the gym exit, never stated a legitimate reason for the stop, and immediately became physically aggressive when you simply asked why you were being detained." His voice carried a mix of professionalism and barely concealed anger. Taylor nodded, adjusting her still damp hoodie. "That's correct. And as you can see from the witness statements and videos, I maintained a professional demeanor throughout the encounter. I identified myself as a federal agent before he attempted to forcibly detain me." She gestured to the growing collection of witness statements being gathered by other officers. The gym manager had brought out towels and water bottles for everyone still giving statements. Inside, through the big windows, people continued to watch the scene unfold, some still recording, others talking animatedly among themselves. The incident had already begun spreading across social media, with local news vans pulling into the parking lot. "I've got 17 different videos," one officer reported, approaching the lieutenant. "All from different angles. The gym's security footage is being downloaded right now, and we've secured Officer Reeves' dash cam and body cam footage." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, it's not good. Any of it." Taylor watched as more witnesses came forward, each adding their perspective to the growing pile of evidence. A young student from the local university replayed her video for the officers, her voice shaking with emotion as she described watching the entire incident unfold. "He never gave her a chance," she said. "He just assumed." The lieutenant turned back to Taylor, his expression grave. "Special Agent, I want to personally apologize for Officer Reeves' conduct tonight. This isn't what we train our officers to do, and it's not what our department stands for." He seemed to age years as he spoke, the weight of the situation visible in his posture. A reporter had managed to make her way through the crowd, microphone in hand, but other officers kept her at a respectful distance. This wasn't going to be a media circus, at least not tonight. This was about something more important than headlines. It was about accountability and change. "Lieutenant," Taylor said, her voice firm but not unkind, "I appreciate your apology, but this isn't about making this go away with words. This is about making sure it doesn't happen again, not to me, not to anyone." She gestured to the crowd still gathered in the parking lot. "Every person here tonight saw what unchecked bias looks like in action. They saw how quickly a routine situation can turn dangerous when an officer lets assumptions override training." Officer Reeves was being escorted to a different patrol car now, his badge and weapon already surrendered to his superiors. His face had lost all color as he watched internal affairs officers arrive on the scene, their presence indicating just how seriously the department was taking the incident. Inside the gym, the manager had turned off the usual workout music, and the news was playing on the overhead TVs. The story had already hit the local stations. FBI agent racially profiled and assaulted by local police officer. Incident captured on multiple videos. The headlines seemed to glow accusingly in the fluorescent gym lighting. "We'll need you to come down to headquarters to complete the formal complaint," the lieutenant said, flipping to a new page in his notebook. "Our Internal Affairs Division will want to interview you themselves, and I expect the FBI will be conducting their own investigation into this incident." Taylor nodded, already thinking about the calls she'd need to make to her supervisor, to the Civil Rights Division, to the training department where she taught community relations to new agents. This incident would become a case study, a teaching tool, a reminder of why constant vigilance against bias was so crucial in law enforcement. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but many remained, sharing their contact information with officers and each other, creating a network of witnesses determined to see this through. Some had already posted their videos online, where they were rapidly gathering comments and shares, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. "You know what the saddest part is?" Taylor said to the lieutenant, watching as Officer Reeves was driven away. "He probably doesn't even realize how many lives he impacted tonight. Not just mine, but every person who witnessed this, every person who will see those videos, every person who has ever experienced something similar but didn't have an FBI badge to protect them." The lieutenant nodded slowly, understanding the deeper implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about one officer's mistake. It was about systemic issues that needed to be addressed, about training that needed to be revised, about attitudes that needed to change. As Taylor gathered her belongings, still damp from their spill onto the wet pavement, she noticed several gym members approaching her. They weren't coming to give statements. They'd already done that. They were coming to thank her, to express their support, to share their own stories of similar encounters. "What you did tonight," one older woman said, her eyes bright with emotion, "standing your ground, staying professional even when he was so aggressive, it showed everyone watching that this isn't okay. That we don't have to accept this kind of treatment." Others nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. The parking lot lights cast long shadows now, the earlier rain leaving everything with a glossy sheen. News vans continued to arrive, their satellite dishes reaching up into the night sky like maple trees. This story would be everywhere by morning, but Taylor was already thinking beyond the headlines. She thought about her training sessions scheduled for next week, about the new FBI agents who would sit in her classroom, eager to learn. This incident would become part of their education, not just as an example of what not to do, but as a reminder of the responsibility they carried with their badges. The lieutenant finished his notes and closed his notebook, looking exhausted but determined. "We'll make this right," he said, though they both knew it wasn't that simple. Making it right would require more than just disciplinary action against one officer. It would require systemic change, continued education, and constant vigilance against the kind of bias that had turned a simple walk to a car into a viral video about police misconduct. As Taylor prepared to leave for the police station to file her formal complaint, she looked back at the gym's entrance, where it had all started less than an hour ago. Such a short time, but long enough to expose deep-rooted issues and spark what would surely become a larger conversation about law enforcement, community relations, and the ongoing struggle for equal treatment under the law. The following weeks unfolded like a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and investigations. Taylor sat in a conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by case files and witness statements, reviewing the incident for what felt like the 100th time. The videos from that rainy night had spread across social media platforms, gaining millions of views and sparking intense discussions about police reform. The department has placed Officer Reeves on immediate administrative leave, the Internal Affairs captain explained, his fingers drumming nervously on the thick folder in front of him. "We've received over 200 witness statements, including 47 videos from different angles. There's no ambiguity about what happened that night." Taylor nodded, taking another sip of her coffee. The bruises on her arm had faded, but the impact of that evening had only grown stronger. Local news stations had been running the story continuously, with national networks picking it up as well. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests from journalists and civil rights organizations. "We're not just looking at Officer Reeves," the captain continued, flipping through his notes. "We're conducting a full audit of all his previous stops and arrests. The pattern we're seeing is concerning." He pushed a document across the table, showing statistics that painted a clear picture of biased policing. The gym where it all happened had become something of a landmark. People would stop outside, taking pictures of the parking lot where the incident occurred. The manager had put up a sign promoting unity and respect, and membership had actually increased as people wanted to support a business that stood by its customers. The Civil Rights Division wants to use this case as a catalyst for department-wide reform, Taylor's supervisor said during another meeting. "Your handling of the situation, staying professional even when faced with aggression, it's becoming a teaching moment for law enforcement across the country." Local community leaders had organized town hall meetings to discuss the incident and its broader implications. Taylor attended several, not as a speaker but as an observer, listening to residents share their own experiences with law enforcement bias. Each story reinforced the importance of what she was fighting for. "My daughter saw the video," one mother said during a community meeting, her voice trembling. "She asked me why the police officer was so mean to you when you didn't do anything wrong. How do I explain that to a child?" The room had fallen silent, the weight of her question hanging in the air. The investigation moved quickly, driven by public pressure and the overwhelming evidence. Officer Reeves' disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following month, but the department wasn't waiting to take action. They'd already begun implementing new training protocols and reviewing their policies on suspicious person calls. Taylor spent hours working with the department's training division, helping them develop new programs focused on recognizing and addressing implicit bias. "We need to make sure every officer understands that their actions have consequences," she explained during one session. "Not just for their careers, but for the entire community's trust in law enforcement." The security cameras from the gym had captured everything in crystal clear detail. The footage showed Reeves' patrol car following Taylor from the moment she left the building, contradicting his initial claim about responding to a call. His body camera audio revealed the aggression in his voice, the lack of any reasonable suspicion for the stop. "You handled it exactly right," the FBI training director told Taylor during a review session. "You stayed calm, identified yourself clearly, and gave him every opportunity to de-escalate. We're going to use this incident in our training programs, if you're comfortable with that." Taylor agreed immediately, knowing that her experience could help prevent similar incidents. Support poured in from unexpected places. Police officers from other departments reached out, thanking her for highlighting issues they'd seen but felt powerless to address. Civil rights attorneys offered their services pro bono, though Taylor had the full weight of the FBI's legal team behind her. The gym members who witnessed the incident had formed an informal support group, staying in touch through social media and meeting regularly to discuss changes they wanted to see in their community. Many had never been politically active before, but that night had awakened something in them. "Your case is already making a difference," Taylor's partner told her one morning, showing her a news article about changes being implemented in police departments across the state. They're revising their training programs, updating their policies on suspicious person calls, requiring more detailed documentation for stops. The department's internal investigation uncovered more than just Reeves' misconduct that night. It revealed a pattern of similar stops, a history of complaints that had been dismissed or overlooked. Each revelation strengthened the case for systemic reform. Local police academy instructors reached out, asking Taylor to help develop new training modules. "We need to do better," one instructor admitted during a planning session. "What happened that night? It shouldn't be possible for an officer who completed our training to act that way." The videos continued to circulate online, sparking discussions in law enforcement forums and civil rights groups alike. Comments poured in from around the world, many sharing similar experiences, others expressing shock at how quickly a simple walk to a car could turn dangerous. Taylor's FBI colleagues supported her fully, helping her balance her regular caseload with the demands of the investigation. "What happened to you could have happened to any of us," one agent said during a team meeting. "This isn't just your fight, it's all of ours." The evidence was overwhelming. Reeves' dashcam showed no suspicious activity to justify the stop. His body camera recorded no radio call about suspicious persons in the area. The gym's security footage showed Taylor walking directly from the building to her car, doing nothing to warrant police attention. As the disciplinary hearing approached, Taylor prepared her testimony carefully. This wasn't about revenge or punishment, it was about accountability and change. She worked with the department's legal team to ensure her statement would address not just Reeves' actions that night, but the larger issues they represented. This case isn't just about one officer's mistakes, she explained during a preparation session. It's about the assumptions that led to those mistakes, the training that failed to prevent them, and the changes needed to make sure they don't happen again. The incident had become a turning point, not just for one police department, but for law enforcement agencies watching from around the country. It demonstrated how quickly bias could override training, how easily authority could be misused, and how important it was to hold officers accountable for their actions. As Taylor reviewed her notes one final time before the hearing, she thought about all the people who'd been impacted by that rainy night in the gym parking lot. What started as a simple walk to her car had become a catalyst for change, a moment that would be studied and discussed in police academies and FBI training sessions for years to come. 6 months after that rainy night in the gym parking lot, Taylor stood at a podium in the police academy's main lecture hall. The room was packed with new recruits, veteran officers, and department heads from across the state. The incident that could have ended tragically had instead become a powerful catalyst for change in law enforcement. "I'm not here to shame anyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I'm here because what happened that night exposed problems we can't ignore anymore." Behind her, screens showed still images from the various videos, each frame telling part of the story that had gone viral and sparked nationwide discussions. Officer Reeves' disciplinary hearing had ended with his termination from the force. The evidence was too overwhelming, the public pressure too intense for any other outcome. But for Taylor, his firing wasn't the victory. The real win was in the changes that followed. "Look at these images," she continued, gesturing to the screens. "In just 30 minutes, we see how quickly bias can override training, how easily authority can be misused, and how important accountability is in our profession." The recruits leaned forward in their seats, many taking notes, others recording the session on department-issued tablets. The local police department had undergone a complete overhaul of its training programs. Every officer now went through enhanced bias recognition training, with regular refresher courses throughout the year. Body camera footage was reviewed more frequently, and suspicious person stops required detailed documentation and regular audits. "You might think you're immune to bias," Taylor told the audience, walking away from the podium to engage more directly with the recruits. "You might believe you'd never make the mistakes Officer Reeves made that night. But bias isn't always obvious. It can creep into our decisions without us realizing it." The gym where it all happened had become a symbol of community activism. The manager had turned one wall into a community unity board where people shared stories of positive interactions with law enforcement. It was a small step, but it represented the kind of change Taylor had hoped to see. "The changes we're seeing aren't just about policies and procedures," she explained, showing slides of the new training protocols. "They're about changing the way we think about our role in the community, about understanding the impact our actions have on public trust." In the months following the incident, reports of biased policing had decreased significantly in the area. Officers were more careful about documenting their reasons for stops, and the department had implemented a new system for tracking patterns in police interactions. "Every person you stop, every citizen you interact with, is someone's family member," Taylor reminded the recruits. "They're someone's parent, child, friend. They deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or where you encounter them." The FBI had incorporated the incident into its training programs nationwide. Taylor's handling of the situation, staying calm, professional, and focused even while being assaulted, had become a model for dealing with difficult law enforcement encounters. "The badge we wear comes with tremendous responsibility," she said, holding up her FBI credentials. "It's not just about enforcing laws, it's about building trust, about showing the community that we're here to protect and serve everyone equally." The witnesses from that night had remained active in community policing initiatives. Many had joined citizen advisory boards, working with law enforcement to improve communication and understanding between police and the public. Change doesn't happen overnight, Taylor acknowledged, showing statistics from the department's reform efforts. But it does happen when we acknowledge our mistakes, learn from them, and commit to doing better. The department's new training program included regular community interaction sessions where officers spent time getting to know the people they served outside of enforcement situations. It was a simple idea, but it was making a difference in how officers and citizens viewed each other. The most powerful tool we have isn't our weapon, Taylor told the recruits. It's our ability to communicate, to listen, to treat every person we encounter with dignity and respect. The room was silent, every person present absorbing the weight of her words. Videos from that rainy night were still being used in training sessions across the country. But now they were paired with videos of positive police interactions, showing how situations could be handled differently when officers checked their biases and followed their training. We have a choice every time we interact with the public, Taylor said, approaching the conclusion of her presentation. We can either build trust or break it. We can either strengthen community bonds or weaken them. The choice is ours. The department had created a new position, Community Trust Coordinator, specifically focused on monitoring police interactions and identifying potential bias issues before they escalated into incidents like the one Taylor experienced. Your uniform, your badge, your authority. These things don't make you above the law, she reminded them. They make you more accountable to it. Every action you take, every decision you make, has the power to impact not just one person, but an entire community. As Taylor wrapped up her presentation, she noticed several of the original witnesses from that night sitting in the back of the room. They had become regular participants in police training sessions, sharing their perspectives on how the incident had affected their view of law enforcement. That night could have ended very differently, she concluded, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Instead, it became a moment of transformation, not just for one department, but for law enforcement agencies across the country. Remember that every interaction you have has the potential to be that kind of moment. The changes sparked by that rainy night continue to spread, rippling out through departments across the nation. What started as one officer's mistake had become a movement for reform, a call for accountability, and a reminder that the path to better law enforcement began with acknowledging the need for change. As Taylor left the podium to enthusiastic applause, she knew that while one incident had sparked these changes, it would take the commitment of every person in that room, and thousands more like them, to ensure that such incidents became part of the past, not the future, of law enforcement in America.